The Young and the Restless spoilers Wednesday full episodes the 4th of February 2026. Fans can expect a dangerous undercurrent to ripple through Genoa City as Nikki Newman's maternal instincts are triggered by a growing sense of dread surrounding Lily Winters. A fear that deepens the more Nikki reflects on Victor Newman's latest maneuver. Lily, far from the familiar protection of Genoa City and traveling with her twins, believes she has stepped away from the constant power games that define her life. Yet this distance is precisely what makes her vulnerable. What Lily does not realize is that her location has already been exposed and quietly folded into Victor's larger design, one in which she is not the target but the leverage. Victor does not see Lily as collateral damage in the traditional sense. In his mind, she is a strategic piece. A human variable that can be moved without consequence because he believes he controls every possible outcome. He convinces himself that Lily and the children will not be harmed, that the chaos he has set in motion is contained and calculated. But the truth is that once power outages hit and communication services fail, control becomes an illusion. In the dark, without phones, without outside eyes, anything can happen, and Victor's confidence rests on assumptions rather than guarantees. Nikki initially views this plan as brilliant in its precision, a testament to Victor's unmatched ability to stay 10 steps ahead of everyone else. But even she cannot silence the creeping realization that genius and recklessness often share the same spine. Something shifts for Nikki when the implications fully settle in, when she recognizes that Lily is isolated, that the twins are exposed, and that Victor's promise of safety is built on nothing more than his faith in his own dominance. That fear grows sharper as the week unfolds, pushing Nikki into a rare position where trust in her husband collides with her conscience. And the possibility that Lily could be placed in real danger becomes a weight she cannot ignore. At the same time, Victor's vendetta against Kane Ashby escalates, transforming from a cold corporate chess match into something deeply personal and openly hostile. Kane, already bristling under the pressure of Victor's manipulations, reaches a breaking point that culminates in a heated confrontation with Adam Newman, a clash fueled by years of resentment, betrayal, and unspoken understanding that Adam often functions as Victor's most dangerous extension. The encounter is less about the argument itself and more about what it represents, a warning shot across the bow, proof that Victor's influence continues to poison every relationship it touches. When Victor is later questioned by his family, he responds not with transparency but with reassurance delivered in his signature tone of absolute authority, urging them to trust him without question, as if faith alone can neutralize risk. Yet beneath his calm exterior lies a refusal to acknowledge the variables he cannot control, particularly the emotional fallout that follows when people realize they have been used. Nikki hears Victor's words, but she also hears what he is not saying, and the silence around Lily's safety speaks louder than any promise he offers. While danger quietly tightens around Lily, another storyline unfolds that underscores how interconnected and fragile these lives have become. Holden Novak finds himself facing a new mission that requires assistance he cannot secure alone, leading him to turn to Claire Grace Newman. Claire's involvement is not accidental. She represents both access and vulnerability, a bridge between loyalty and curiosity. Whatever Holden is stepping into demands discretion, trust, and a willingness to operate in moral gray zones. And Claire's decision to help places her directly in the orbit of secrets that have a habit of detonating without warning. Her participation subtly reinforces a recurring truth in Genoa City: no one remains untouched for long, and even those who believe they are acting on the sidelines inevitably become part of the game. The task Holden's presence may appear contained, but the ripple effects of Claire's involvement threaten to draw her deeper into conflicts she may not yet fully understand. Echoing the same pattern that has trapped generations before her. Running parallel to these developments is the desperate search for Dominic Newman, Abbott Winters' chancellor. A crisis that unites Abby Winters and Devon Winters in a shared fear that overrides their past disagreements. The disappearance of Dominic has stripped away pretense and pride, forcing both of them to confront the unthinkable reality that their child is in danger. Help begins to arrive from unexpected places, reinforcing the idea that even in a town driven by ambition and rivalry, moments of genuine solidarity can still surface when the stakes are high enough. Each lead, each fragment of information, carries the promise of hope and the threat of heartbreak, and the urgency of the search magnifies every emotion Abby and Devon try to suppress. Their cooperation is not seamless, it is raw, strained, and fueled by panic, but it is real, and it reflects how crises expose the truth of what matters most. As the net begins to tighten around Dominic's whereabouts, the sense of time running out becomes suffocating, adding another layer of tension to an already volatile landscape. What makes these storylines especially combustible is how they intersect thematically rather than directly, all orbiting the same central truth: control is fleeting. And the belief that one person can engineer outcomes without consequence is the most dangerous illusion of all. Victor's confidence in his plan involving Lily mirrors the same arrogance that has driven countless disasters before, while Nikki's fear represents the voice of experience. The understanding that survival often depends on acknowledging vulnerability rather than denying it. Kane's fury toward Adam, Holden's reliance on Claire, Abby and Devon's frantic search for Dominic, all of these threads speak to a world where trust is currency and miscalculation is fatal. As Genoa City braces for the fallout, the audience is left with an unsettling question hanging in the air. When the lights go out, the phones go dead, and carefully constructed plans collide with human unpredictability, who will pay the price for Victor Newman's certainty that he alone knows how this ends? Nick Newman was supposed to be on the mend, and for a while he managed to convince almost everyone, including himself, that the painkillers were working. The worst of the physical agony was behind him, and he could present a version of himself that looked steady enough to ease the worries of those who cared about him. In casual conversations at Crimson Lights, in brief exchanges at Newman Enterprises, he brushed off concern with that familiar, half-disarming charm, insisting that the medication was doing its job and that he finally felt like he could move without wincing at every step. But the truth, which he kept carefully hidden beneath jokes and practiced deflections, was far less reassuring. The pain never really left, it merely receded into a dull, persistent throb that came roaring back whenever the drugs began to wear off. Instead of talking about this honestly, especially with Sharon Newman, the one person who could have seen through his bravado and insisted on a different path, Nick chose to bury it. He downplayed the severity of his aches, skipped over the shakiness in his hands when he thought no one was looking, and quietly stretched out his prescription a little longer, telling himself that he needed just one more pill to get through the day, just one more to make it through another sleepless night. Sharon's presence in his orbit made the deception worse, because every time she offered genuine concern, every time she looked at him with those eyes that had seen him at his lowest, he felt a flicker of shame he immediately smothered. Admitting he was losing control would feel like failing her, failing himself, and failing the image of the reliable, grounded man he had tried so hard to become. So, he smiled, lied by omission, and sank slowly into a dependence that frightened him more than he would ever say out loud. The line between using painkillers to function and needing them to feel normal blurred so gradually that he couldn't pinpoint the moment he crossed it. All he knew was that the bottle in his pocket had become both a lifeline and a shackle, and every time he reached for it, he was dimly aware that he was not only numbing the physical pain but also silencing the deeper wounds he had no intention of examining. Far from the complex emotional dance unfolding around Nick, another crisis gathered momentum around Dominic Newman, Abbott Winter's chancellor, whose fate had become a focal point of fear and tension for multiple families. Recent moments had offered viewers a heartbreaking blend of tenderness and unease as Dominic, in a rare moment of peace, experienced a comforting dream about Chancellor, a dream that seemed to wrap him in the memory of a man whose presence had always signified safety and protection. In that dream, Dominic could almost feel Chance's arms around him, hear the steady cadence of his voice, sense the calm that came from knowing someone strong and capable was watching over him. For Mariah Copeland, who remained by Dominic's side throughout the ordeal, that dream might have been a small mercy, a reminder that in some part of the boy's subconscious, he still felt loved and guarded even in the midst of upheaval. Yet the same dream also underscored the gravity of what she had done. She had removed him from the structure of his life, from the arms of Abby and Devon, and the extended family that had claimed him, believing that she alone truly understood what he needed and what he was being denied. At first, Mariah clung fiercely to the narrative that she was rescuing Dominic from being treated like a possession, bargaining chip in adult arguments about legacy and lineage. But as days slipped into each other and the reality of isolation settled in, cracks appeared in her resolve. Every time she saw him stir in his sleep, murmuring Chance's name or reaching out for a presence that wasn't there, she was reminded that Dominic's emotional world was not a blank slate she could redraw at will. He had ties that ran deeper than her pain, bonds that existed beyond her fear of being sidelined again. Still, Mariah remained with him, determined to see her plan through, convincing herself that once she had proven how much Dominic relied on her, once she had forced everyone else to realize how critical she was to his emotional well-being, they would have no choice but to reevaluate her place in his life. What she failed to fully account for was the inherent danger in building a plan around desperation and unresolved trauma. The longer she stayed away, the more risky their situation became, not just because the law would eventually tighten around them, but because practical dangers multiplied when a young child was kept in hiding, away from immediate medical support, away from the stability of routine, away from the checks and balances that came with having more than one set of eyes watching over him. The spoilers hinted ominously that Mariah's plan with Dominic would ultimately lead to a perilous outcome, and that shadow loomed over every tender moment she tried to create, turning even her most loving gestures into potential preludes to disaster. Back in Genoa City, the emotional fallout of Mariah's actions was beginning to take on a life of its own. Sharon and Tessa Porter, once her closest anchors, found themselves grappling with a bitter truth that neither of them had ever wanted to face. Mariah had crossed a line so severe it threatened to permanently alter how they saw her. For Sharon, the knowledge that Mariah had kidnapped Dominic was a devastation layered with guilt. She replayed every recent conversation in her mind, searching for warning signs she had missed, for shifts in Mariah's behavior that might have hinted at a brewing storm. As someone who had fought her own battles with trauma and mental health, Sharon understood better than most how old wounds could distort judgment, how fear of loss could lead to irrational, even harmful decisions. But understanding did not erase the horror of what had been done or the danger Dominic had been placed in. The child was not an abstract symbol. He was a living, breathing boy, a fragile being whose life had been uprooted and the name of love twisted into something possessive and unstable. Tessa, meanwhile, was forced to confront the widening gulf between the woman she had fallen in love with and the person Mariah had become under pressure. It hurt to admit that the Mariah she remembered, the one who could be impulsive but fundamentally kind, who fought her demons without allowing them to consume everyone around her, seemed to be slipping further away. When Tessa told Sharon that Mariah was no longer the person they remembered, it was not a statement of cruelty but of heartbreak. She could see the ways in which Mariah's fear of being excluded from Dominic's life, her deep-seated insecurity about her own worthiness as a mother figure, had combined with external manipulation to create a version of herself that was nearly unrecognizable. From Genoa City, both Sharon and Tessa were left with a tortuous limbo. They could neither reach Mariah in any practical sense nor fully let go of their love for her. They were forced to stand by as law enforcement and furious parents moved to respond, knowing that any eventual reunion would be colored by betrayal, grief, and a long, painful journey toward any kind of forgiveness, if forgiveness was even possible. While emotional tempests raged around Dominic and the people who loved him, another quieter but no less dangerous game played out in the shadows, centered on information and the power it brings. Claire found herself on a mission to dig up damaging intel on Audra Charles, a woman whose ambition and moral flexibility had already earned her a controversial reputation in Genoa City. Claire's decision to pursue incriminating information on Audra was not motivated by idle curiosity. It was an act shaped by loyalties and the growing awareness that knowledge is often the only shield against those who thrive in chaos. Audra had a talent for slipping out of accountability, dancing at the edges of scandal and opportunity. And Claire understood that exposing even one well-hidden vulnerability could shift the balance of power. As she combed through records, traced old connections, and revisited half-forgotten moments that might hint at deeper schemes, Claire was forced to confront her own complicated place in the Newman orbit. Every piece of dirt she uncovered on Audra drew her further into a world where ethics were negotiable and alliances were transactional. Yet she also knew that refusing to engage would leave her and those she cared about dangerously exposed. This investigation served as a prelude to an even larger test when Holden received a new assignment and turned directly to Claire for help. His need for her assistance was not an accident, it was a recognition of the sharp mind and quiet determination she had already displayed. The mission he presented promised risk, ambiguity, and the kind of moral murkiness Claire was only beginning to understand. By agreeing to help, she effectively stepped over a threshold, accepting that she would no longer be a passive observer of Newman wars and corporate intrigues, but an active player whose choices could either protect or destroy. The overlap between her search for dirt on Audra and Holden's mysterious task suggested that whatever lay ahead would not just test her skills but also the limits of her conscience. Meanwhile, the broader canvas of Genoa City was colored by another thread of anxiety: the health of Jill Abbott. Jill, a woman who had built a life out of reinvention and defiance, had never been one to surrender easily to time or frailty. Her presence in the corporate world and in the lives of those who orbited her had always been formidable, a mix of sharp intellect, ambition, and stubborn resilience. That was why news of her medical condition carried such weight. This time, the update came through Lauren Fenmore Baldwin, someone positioned close enough to the situation to recognize the gravity behind clinical terms and measured doctors' reports. Lauren, who had weathered her own storms and loved Jill in that complicated, adversarial way that only long histories can produce, did not deliver the news as idle gossip. For her, Jill's health scare was a reminder of how fragile even the strongest players could be. She had seen Jill push herself beyond reasonable limits, dismiss warning signs, and mask exhaustion behind bravado for far too long. Now, with real concerns brewing, Lauren was caught between respecting Jill's fierce independence and acknowledging that ignoring the seriousness of her condition would be an act of cruelty by omission. The health update cast a subtle shadow over business dealings and family squabbles alike, because if Jill's strength faltered, it would leave a vacuum that others would rush to fill. Perhaps not always with the best intentions. The legacy she had fought so hard to shape, Chancellor Winters, her influence, her impact on the next generation, suddenly seemed more vulnerable. And that vulnerability made people around her reconsider their own priorities, their grudges, their unresolved grievances.